Members of Venezuela's armed forces have joined the call by President Nicolás Maduro to sign a letter addressed to the people of the United States. This is part of the military exercises taking place this week. The activity was headed by the Minister of Defense of Venezuela, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, who reaffirmed the willingness for dialogue and peace, while maintaining the right to defend Venezuela. And over the weekend, Venezuela's Bolivarian armed forces carry out the most important military exercises in the country's history. This is due to the ongoing attacks and threats against the government of President Nicolás Maduro. The president was present during the exercises, receiving the full support of the armed forces.
A handshake with the commander-in-chief symbolizes the armed forces' recognition of Nicolás Maduro as president of Venezuela.
The armed forces are more united than ever during these times of aggression against our people. The armed forces have come together and risen to the task of being even more united than before, with the sole purpose of defending our nation.
They joined together to show Venezuela's defense and anti-air prowess.
The dangers Venezuela is now facing come due to mercenary politicians, from a mercenary diplomacy that stands against international law. We think that the Venezuelan people want peace, and our armed forces are a force of peace. Nonetheless, we're ready to face any sort of aggression or threat.
This is one of the most important military exercises to strengthen the defense of Venezuela's airspace. This was the first missile fired during the exercises. The rocket launcher was given to President Maduro as a keepsake of the armed forces' commitment.
This was the first missile fired by a soldier trained by the revolution, as a testimony of the military and civic union of the armed forces in compliance with our sacred duty to defend the lands of Bolívar and Chávez.
These are our armed forces who will defend our airspace and make our cities impregnable. On land, it will be impossible for them to invade because Bolivar's soldiers are there, and they will make the imperial forces pay a high price if they dare to touch our sacred land. On that basis, I accept this gift, showing your commitment.
The calls of the opposition asking the armed forces to stand behind them have been unsuccessful. From anti-air defense to ground defense, the Bolivarian armed forces show their new doctrine, a defense involving all people.
These are the most important military exercises in our recent history. They are so important because of the political context we are living in, because of the real threats posed by the imperialist government of Donald Trump against peace in Venezuela. The imperialist chief has directly threatened us, which has created great indignation and widespread rejection from Venezuelans and from the international community. This has forced us to truly get ourselves ready to defend our right to peace.
Those who have been historically excluded are ready for war, if that's what is necessary to defend peace.
Cuba has condemned the U.S. for pushing a draft resolution at the UN Security Council to force Venezuela to accept humanitarian aid. President Nicolás Maduro has already said that the aid is a prelude to a military invasion.
United States imperialism has dictated the validity of the Monroe Doctrine, among other forms of attacking the sovereignty of nations and of people, in particular when it comes to resources. These attacks repress self-determination in varied and inventive ways.
Russia plans to present a proposal to the UN Security Council in the hope of finding a solution to the situation in Venezuela. The Russian proposal is a response to the U.S. demand for new elections. It calls for a peaceful solution and a political settlement that includes the mechanism developed in Montevideo last week. Our correspondent in Russia, Hansel Oro, brings us more details.
Russia continues to advocate for the creation of an international forum to develop talks between the Venezuelan government and the opposition. The Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs confirmed the creation of a project for Venezuela, which looks to get the majority of votes at the UN Security Council. Also, The director of the Latin American Department of Russia's Foreign Ministry, Alexander Shetinin, said that several member nations of the UN Security Council presented other proposals, including the United States, which seeks to impose new elections in Venezuela. This is seen by Russia as yet another act of intervention that looks to delegitimize the elections that took place in Venezuela last May. Russia also opposed the self-proclaimed interim president's policies, which are backed by the West. It also opposes a military intervention in Venezuela, which could have extremely negative consequences, not only for the country, but also for the region. Finally, a committee in the Russian parliament will be formed to investigate cases of interventionism by the US, including in Venezuela.
We thank Hansel for that report. The Venezuelan ambassador to the United Nations, Samuel Moncada, has spoken of the duty to secure a second liberation of Venezuela. On social media, Moncada said that the United States President Donald Trump is engaged in a colonialist project and must be resisted. Many Venezuelans have criticized the government of Colombia for supporting interventionist attacks. But what is the opinion of people living near the border? More in this report.
On the Simón Bolívar Bridge located in the state of Táchira at the border with Colombia, dozens of people cross the bridge every day. Most of them denounce that they're being used as part of a psychological war operated by the United States.
I say to the people of Táchira to think about it. The United States is going to come and shoot all of us. They are going to destroy our country. There is an economic blockade in Venezuela. We need to support our president. I'm a revolutionary woman.
Venezuelan people say that the media campaign and humanitarian aid are part of the coup against the government, carried out by opposition members accused of committing crimes.
After we cross this bridge with the first truck full of humanitarian aid, the tyranny will be over. A transitional government will begin.
But a popular rejection to these opposition speeches is stronger.
They want to blame the government for blocking the humanitarian aid, but it has not been approved by the International Red Cross or by any organization. Our people and our Colombian brothers are against these attacks. It's not the Colombian people who are against Venezuela, it's their government. There has been demonstrations in different parts of Colombia in support of the Bolivarian Revolution.
Most of the local people at the Colombian border live in peace, and they want to keep it that way, a reality hidden by the mainstream media campaign.
It is not a secret that we have been suffering an economic war for more than 4 years. They have frozen the PDVSA account and international transactions. They have closed down our international bank accounts. That's our reality. We cannot deny it. That has affected our lives and our security. If they lift these sanctions, we have the resources to guarantee food and medicines that the country needs. We have the means and the resources, not only for the Venezuelan people, but also for 5 million Colombians who live in Venezuela.
Most of the local people at the Colombian border live in peace, and they want to keep it that way, a reality hidden by the mainstream media campaign.
Venezuelans all over the country have been signing a document condemning U.S. imperialism in Latin America. U.S. journalist Max Blumenthal was in Caracas to see it firsthand on Sunday.
Okay, so we're here in Simón Bolívar Square in Caracas, and people are lining up for blocks and blocks to sign a declaration against American imperialism, against American intervention, calling on the U.S. not to intervene and to allow Venezuela to remain in peace. The lines are massive here, and the government is seeking to get 10 million signatures, and you can see just how long the lines are. They're stretching around the block. They're going all the way back here, all the way around this block, and they're filling up the square. And people have been coming all day and will be coming all afternoon to sign this declaration.
Let's look at how this campaign to gather signatures is developing in Caracas.
Hands off Venezuela is the message coming from those who have lined up. The signing of the people can be seen as a sort of defense against external threats and the coup which has been promoted by the opposition.
I believe this gentleman has no country. He would sell his homeland and is not able to open his eyes to see that here there's a people who would give their lives in order to defend our homeland against imperialism. That's why we are signing.
But the threats of the military intervention don't only come from the U.S. The self-proclaimed right-wing lawmaker, Juan Guaido, has not discarded any option.
We will once again do whatever is possible. This is a very controversial issue, but we will use our sovereignty and our competency to do whatever is required.
The calls for peace and respect for sovereignty continue. Meanwhile, the strategy of delivering humanitarian aid is being used by the U.S. and its allies to attack Venezuela in an attempt to topple President Nicolás Maduro.
They have totally failed in imposing a dictatorship in Venezuela. Our people are in the streets to defend our constitution, our democracy. The coup won't succeed. The interference attempt won't succeed, and we will not accept any handout from the empire under the false pretense of a humanitarian crisis.
The policy promoted by Washington is not new. It's been promoting an economic war against Venezuela for years.
In the last 2 or 3 years, they have stolen more than $60 billion. And now they are supposedly bringing humanitarian aid. This is just a Trojan horse or supposed humanitarian aid. What we say is hands off Venezuela and stop the economic crimes and the economic blockade against Venezuela.
Many think that it is ironic that the White House promises aid worth $20 million for Venezuela, while at the same time blocking Venezuelan assets worth over $20 billion.
The Southern Africa Development Community has expressed solidarity with Venezuela and condemned attempts by some countries to interfere in its internal affairs. In a statement, the chairperson of the SADC and President of Namibia, Hage Geingob, emphasized the need to respect the democratically elected government led by President Nicolás Maduro. He adds that supporting the self-proclamation by Juan Guaido as interim president means supporting a coup. A crowd of people gathered in protest outside the U.S. Embassy in South Africa against the government's support for a coup in Venezuela. The protesters are from different political, workers, and social movements, including the ruling African National Congress and its alliance partner, the South African Communist Party. They are demanding an immediate end to the undermining of Venezuela's sovereignty. This follows pickets which were held on Friday at the U.S. consulates in Johannesburg and Cape Town. Members of the People's Houses organization in Turkey expressed their total support for Venezuela by collecting signatures. The initiative to show support for the government of President Nicolás Maduro took place at the Venezuelan embassy in Ankara. At least 2 people have been killed in a helicopter crash in Brazil, including a famous journalist, Ricardo Boechat. Early report says the aircraft lost control and crashed into a truck on a highway in Sao Paulo. 66-year-old Boechat was a well-known television journalist and a familiar figure in the country. He was returning from a conference and was heading back to his TV station, Bandeirantes, when the crash happened.
When the helicopter crashed, it exploded. The pieces are all over the place. It caught fire. There were bodies on the floor. After 15 minutes, firefighters arrived.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. At least 4 people have been killed and dozens injured in Haiti as demonstrations enter a 5th day. Thousands of opposition demonstrators have taken to the streets this week, burning tires, throwing stones, and looting shops. They are demanding that President Jovenel Moïse step down. Haitians accuse Mr. Moïse and other officials of corruption. An indigenous community in Guatemala is doing its part to save the planet. They're turning recycled bicycles into machines that help protect the local environment and support poor families. The bikes are used for different activities, from pumping water from a wheel to shelling a corn.
Desde
From the beginning, we started working in the communities because they didn't have electricity or drinking water. So from the beginning, we began to see how we could meet those needs.
We do not pollute the environment. We do not burn diesel. We do all that with pedaling, so we do not pollute the environment.
China could become Mexico's main commercial partner, and billions of dollars are already available for investment. Almost 100 companies affiliated to the Mexican and Chinese Chamber of Commerce have received $25 billion to participate in infrastructure projects announced by the government of Mexico. They include the Mayan train lane and the construction of the Santa Lucia airport. Mexican authorities say that only 10% will come from public resources and the rest from the private sector. The Catholic Church in Mexico has recognized at least 150 priests who have been suspended from their ministry for child abuse in the last 9 years. In a news conference, the president of the Mexican Church, Rogelio Cabrera Lopez, said he's preparing for the summit against sexual abuse of minors due to be held at the Vatican. He says some criminal priests are in jail and others have been suspended from their duties. The Archbishop said they expect the crime rate to decrease after zero-tolerance measures are applied. A Salvadorian family has been rescued from the Rio Grande River between the Mexico and U.S. border. According to local reports, there were 7 members of the family, including 2 babies and 2 minors. They were rescued while trying to swim to Texas. The family was returned to Mexico, where they received medical treatment. About 2,000 Central American migrants are waiting in Mexico for their documents to be processed so they enter the U.S. Several families who were separated at the U.S. border with Mexico have sued the U.S. government. The migrant families say they will go to court due to the trauma they experienced. The U.S. Council for Immigration, an organization that fights for migrants' rights, is helping 6 families to sue. According to official data, almost 3,000 families were separated due to President Donald Trump's zero-tolerance policy on immigration. Tensions are rising in Washington once again over the United States President Donald Trump's plan to build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico. There's a risk of another government shutdown. According to our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Jorge Gestoso, gives us more details.
Thank you. Friday is coming very soon here in Washington, and with Friday is a new deadline, the new possibility of a shutdown between Democrats and President Trump. And again, the central issue is the wall. President Trump insists that he wants $5.7 billion to build a wall. Democrats are not ready to give up. It seems there's a possibility of a halfway solution of between $1.7 and $2 billion could eventually work. Anyway, in that case, Trump is saying that he will get the money from somewhere else. Today, we're going to see a new confrontation between Democrats and Republicans. President Trump is flying to El Paso in Texas, border city, and he's trying to push, he's going to make his, again, pitch for the necessity of building a wall, because he believes that it's a national security issue, which figures shows that it's not true. Even Republicans in his own party say that it's not such thing as a national security threat going on. And he's going to try to quote eventually numbers, figures that also has been fact-checked that are being incorrect. He's trying to sell the idea that in El Paso, after a wall has been built, security has improved. That is not true. Figures are showing that security has been better even before a piece of the wall has been built. What is very interesting is that Congressman from Texas and possible presidential candidate of the Democratic Party, Beto O'Rourke, is at the same time that President Trump is trying to sell his idea of the wall, Beto O'Rourke is doing an anti-wall rally to prove exactly the opposite. And Beto O'Rourke, according to polls, is one of the favorites to become a nominee for the Democratic Party regarding the presidential election. So we're going to have to watch two things. If negotiations are advancing to try to avoid a shutdown on Friday, and what's going on today in that President Trump versus Beto O'Rourke, pro-wall and anti-wall rallies. We'll go back to you now.
We thank Jorge for that report. The number of social leaders killed in Colombia has risen to 19 this year alone. Our correspondent Tatiana Portela speaks about the latest victim and explores how the crisis continues to affect the country.
The killing of social and political leaders continues in Colombia. Now it's the case of José Arquímedes Moreno, 34 years of age, who lived in northern Santander. The region has been one of the most strongly hit by violence, and several armed groups are in the area, including the ELN and the EPN. Those who did not comply with the peace agreements, as well as paramilitaries and drug traffickers. Over the weekend, heavily armed men went to his home and shot him several times, resulting in his death. The police department says they are investigating those behind the attack. They've also announced a plan to protect those at high risk. Since President Iván Duque took office, at least 217 social leaders have been killed, and in 2019 alone, the figure has reached 19.
A 2,000-year-old mummy has returned to Peru from a museum in Texas. Before making its way to Lima, the mummy was housed at the Corpus Christi Museum of Science and History. According to experts, the mummy was probably a child that belonged to the Collawa culture, the larger Aymara group that live in the Altiplano region. Time for a second break. More news in a minute. Welcome back. At the 32nd African Union Summit in Ethiopia, heads of state had made a commitment to addressing forced displacements and security on the continent. Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki Mahamat, said the issue of forced displacement in Africa remains sadly remarkable. He said it is important to tackle the root causes of the issue, and the United Nations has pledged to support this quest.
It is in this context of renewed hope that we increase our mutual support to peace operations in Africa. To consolidate and build on our gains, I have launched the Action for Peacekeeping initiative to enable UN missions to be more effective, better equipped, safer and more robust.
Nigerian citizens are gearing up to elect political leaders as presidential and National Assembly elections draw near. Current Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari is running for his second term in office. His ruling party will face off against a total of 90 political parties and 73 candidates. 84 million voters are eligible to take to the polls on February 16.
As you can see, posters everywhere. Politicians are coming here, trying to sell their candidacy for us. And to some extent, you can see that, everywhere is a kind of calm. We expect that the election is going to be free and fair, like, our leaders promised us.
During the celebration of the 48th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani spoke to thousands of Iranians in the city of Tehran. Our correspondent Rolando Segura has the details.
Here in Iran, the march celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution is just finished. It came to an end with words from the President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Hassan Rouhani. As you can still see, thousands of people were in attendance, coming up this street to the square where the President, Hassan Rouhani, emphasized the wish for independence and sovereignty for the Islamic nation. He also spoke about the will to continue facing the United States sanctions on the country. We remember on this, the 40th anniversary of the victory of the Islamic Revolution, that the United States has escalated tensions and pulled out of the nuclear agreement, applying more sanctions on the country. Despite those sanctions, Iran still has the will to resist, which you can see in various sectors like art, culture, and science, which support the Islamic Revolution.
And with this report by Rolando Segura, we come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories in our website at telestorenglish.net. And don't forget to join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.